Welcome everyone to another episode of the State of Miami podcast. I'm your host Andres Corrales, and today's guest is a very special guest. Her name is Tori Linder. She's the managing director of the Path of the Panther project, and Tori works at the intersection of storytelling and policy to amplify environmental and sustainable development efforts. So we want to welcome her and say thank you so much for being a guest. Um, Recently, the state of Florida passed the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act, which was a huge win for sustainability, urban development for the animals and for the preservation of the land. And this is aligned with new urbanism because, our development approach takes into consideration the regional scale and aims to protect and conserve these lands that provide so much value to us through providing, drinking water and, a multitude of agricultural uses. And I'm sure you guys know that 1/3 of Miami-Dade County is actually part of the Everglades National Park. So this really hits home, if you will, right? And with Florida's population, including Miami-Dade County's booming by the day and accelerated by the COVID trend and movement, we must direct most new population and employment to compact, walkable urban centers instead of more sprawling, car-dominated development. So thank you, Tori. We just have a few questions. I know you're busy. We appreciate you squeezing us into your schedule. And I'd like to start off by asking you if you can tell us more about the Path of the Panther project.
Absolutely. Well, first, let me just say thank you so much for having me on the show today. It is such a pleasure to connect with you. And as a Miami Beach resident, I'm really grateful for the important work you're doing here in South Florida. So to tell you a bit about the Path of the Panther project, we are a National Geographic Society supported initiative that's been working for the past 4 years to tell the story of the Florida panther and really highlight the critical need to protect its habitat across the state, the Florida Wildlife Corridor. The Florida panther has a remarkable story. It's making a recovery in a time when big cats across the world are in decline, but it's doing so in the face of rapid, sprawling development. From a historic low of less than 30 individuals in the 1970s, we have, or FWC has documented over 200 panthers today. But to continue that recovery, to ensure that we have a success story here in the state of Florida, we're really going to have to plan and think thoughtfully about our green infrastructure and the future of our cities. So our team does really a multitude of things, from producing communications for the public, for decision makers, to stakeholder engagement, ensuring we have conservation outcomes for the Florida Wildlife Corridor. And if helpful, I can explain a little bit about what the Florida Wildlife Corridor is as well.
Yes, please do so.
Sure. So the Florida Wildlife Corridor is a statewide network of private and public lands. It spans nearly 18 million acres from Florida Bay in the south to the Georgia and Alabama borders. And similar to a quilt or an incredible Persian rug, the Florida Wildlife Corridor is really a mosaic. It is comprised of the tremendous public lands we have in the state. We have 4 million contiguous acres of public lands in Southwest Florida. And then, of course, other incredible state parks or national forests like Ocala National Forest. We have incredible DoD lands like Avon Park, Air Force Range, or here close to Miami, Homestead. And then, of course, in the Panhandle, Eglin Air Force Base, which is really a stronghold of our longleaf pine ecosystems. And primarily what we're looking at protecting within the corridor are those missing links that have yet to acquire conservation status. They're primarily working lands, they're cattle ranches and citrus groves, and of course timberlands. Forestry is a major industry in this state. And one of the mechanisms we've been advocating for at the state level is called a conservation easement, whereby the state government or a local land trust acquires the development rights of these working lands to ensure that they stay working into perpetuity. They remain a citrus grove or a cattle ranch or timberlands, but they also remain green forever. They're not at risk of becoming a subdivision or a shopping center.
That's a huge win for the state and for everybody involved. And thank you for being such a strong person and force behind these new, policy and impacts. As a conservationist, do you think it's possible for people and nature to live in balance?
That's a great question. I do, and I think that we have the opportunity here in Florida to really show the globe how it's done. Everyone living in Miami knows the infamous quote, "If we can save the Everglades, we can save the world." And in many capacities, I think that has far more to do with the politics of the situation than it does the ecology of restoration or what's required for um, land conservation. Similarly, with the corridor, I think if we can save the Florida Wildlife Corridor, we will have proven a roadmap to a national model for wildlife corridors and potentially one internationally. I mean, I would love to see the day when we have a protected wildlife corridor from Alaska to Chile.
Wow. I would definitely love that as well. And I think it's awesome how you mentioned that international connection, because I know from doing research preparing for this, I know that you went over to Africa and you did some work over there. So I'm sure that you're literally impacting the world, in a great way, and I'm sure this will lead to more of those developments.
Yeah, it's I have to say I as you mentioned, I started my career in sub-Saharan Africa, working in Rwanda, South Africa, and Kenya, and doing such fascinating work, but it was so eye-opening to me every single time I got on a plane and came home, whether it be for Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever else, and looked outside the airplane window to see another corner of my own backyard. The greater Everglades ecosystem had been paved over. In any given year here in Florida, we're losing 12 to 20 acres an hour to development. We're gaining 1,000 residents a day. Those are staggering statistics that really articulate the pressure on our natural resources. And for me, my family's been here in Florida since the 1800s, grew up with really the privilege of having spent a lot of time in our heartland and Florida's working lands and wildlands, and to see that this was the front lines of conservation, not necessarily not to say that Amazonia or the Serengeti or the Mara or are not, but I think often we overlook the opportunity here in our own backyard. And that's an important reminder for all of us here in Miami as well. There are no other Everglades, and we all have a really important role to play in protecting them.
That's a huge statement. I feel like a lot of people don't really know that there, just how you said, there's no other other Everglades in the whole entire world. We're very unique, and it must be preserved, because if this is gone, there's nothing else like it anywhere in the world.
Yeah, well, do you mind if I ask you a question?
Sure, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, so I think a really key and important part of protecting the corridor long term is really looking at how we build our cities up instead of out, which I know is such an important part of new urbanism as well. Um, could you tell me a little bit about initiatives happening here in Florida or in Southwest Florida that make you excited about the future of new urbanism in the state?
Definitely. So first of all, when it comes to these transportation initiatives like the Bright Line extending to Orlando and to Tampa, I think that's huge for us, because we need those, regional connectivities through transit. And as far as policy in Miami-Dade County, I really like that the actual zoning code is a new urbanism form-based code, which is pretty much directing most developments to be around these corridors and to advance these urban centers. And there's actually a rapid transit zoning policy that's in the works right now. I'm not sure if it'll pass yet, but I know eventually it will. And this is a huge reason why I like to, tell the story of how new urbanism impacts our lives so much, because there's actually 6 corridors in Miami-Dade County that eventually will have either bus rapid transit or heavy rail, which is like the expansion of the metro rail. And they're actually trying to increase the density in these corridors so that more people live around these corridors and are able to live a life that is a multimodal life instead of being chained to your vehicle to have to get around here to Miami-Dade County, right? Another great thing is you being a Miami Beach resident. The Poseidon Ferry actually is is something that I got very excited about because it connects Miami Beach to downtown Miami. Now you don't have to drive if you want to get over there. There's another option, right? So when it comes to advancements in Florida and new urbanism, Seaside was actually uh, the first new urbanism development in the world, pretty much, right? That followed exactly from greenfield development, which means it was natural land and it was dedicated to specifically that kind of development. And that's actually in like by the Panhandle. But I mean, I think Florida has a huge opportunity to be a leader, right? And not just be this tech hub, but to be, a sustainability hub. And we have all of this momentum coming to us, and I feel like we have the responsibility to make this happen. And how you said, not only do it for the beauty of our own backyard and for the success of our own backyard, but to be a model for the rest of the nation and the world. But I don't know if I answered your question correctly. I feel like I went off a little bit because I'm usually the one asking the questions. But um, I'd like to ask
That
you.
was incredibly helpful.
Okay, awesome. I'd like to ask you, just to switch gears a little bit. Can we talk about the health of our marine ecosystems here in Miami and their connection to the Florida Wildlife Corridor?
Absolutely. So, as I discussed a little bit earlier, the Florida Wildlife Corridor and its protection is essential for wide-ranging species like a Florida black bear or a Florida panther that are dependent on a connected network of habitats for their survival and genetic diversity. Um, but protecting the Florida Wildlife Corridor is also essential for us as humans. It is our green infrastructure and serves our cities the same way that our gray infrastructure, like a road or a school or a hospital, does, in that it protects and safeguards our watershed sheds. For example, the Greater Everglades ecosystem. I mean, I think we forget quite often here in Miami that the Greater Everglades actually starts in Orlando, right? The water starts flowing south at Reedy Creek, which basically is Walt Disney World's Animal Kingdom. And what happens in the Northern Everglades in that region, south of Orlando, such as Kissimmee and Poinciana, where we're seeing so much development, is just as important as any of the restoration efforts down south for our community here. In general, um, across Florida, we see such tremendous impacts to our marine ecosystems based on what's occurring on land. And Dr. Sylvia Earle always says, no blue, no green, but also vice versa. No green, no blue. The health of our land is inextricably tied to our waters. And we are fortunate here in Miami to have this 4 million acres of contiguous public lands kind of surrounding us on three sides. Um, but we still have to be conscious of what's going on upstream. And something I will add, obviously each and every one of us has a role to play in advocating for the protection of our natural lands across our state. Um, but we as citizens of the city have huge roles to play in ensuring healthy water quality, making really conscious decisions as to what's going into our yards and our outdoor areas. I've been encouraged by some of the fertilizer bans that have been passed, but another area I think about frequently that to some degree I feel like kind of ties into the theme of new urbanism is really growing local plants and native vegetation in our yards that require less natural resources, that require less fertilizers and pollutants, but also create micro corridors of sorts, microgreen corridors through our cities for our pollinators and other urban wildlife. I just reflecting on a conversation I had recently with Ian Wogan from True Tree Services here in Miami about the fact that a healthy tree cover, a healthy tree canopy makes the place so much more livable.
Yeah.
And that really reframed my thinking about the future of cities and how we ensure people want to live in them versus the sprawl that is eating away at our wildlands.
Yeah, we're definitely against sprawl out here in the new urbanist community, and the street trees are incredibly impactful. I love how you touched on that. They enhance the pedestrian experience. By 100, like a multitude of 100. I'm not even sure if I'm saying that correctly, but it just has a huge impact, on the urban design and pretty much the comfort and it just makes the street more beautiful. It makes it more inviting, and it turns it from just a road to a street into an outdoor room, that people could spend more time in. And I really also loved what you said about the native, plants being, how you said it's because of our climate. The native plants make the most sense. They're they require less maintenance, and it's just I really feel like there has to be this new wave and this movement of sustainable development, and everybody being on board and realizing how it impacts them. Because I really do feel like when we preserve these lands and when we develop compact walkable centers, we are actually preserving ourselves and giving ourselves also a better chance of success, and being able to thrive as a whole. I just
Definitely. Yeah, I just agree entirely. I think Florida really has the potential to be a hub of innovation nationally in this capacity, not just from a policy standpoint, but really from the private sector, from the development sector, being thoughtful as to how we structure new communities, but also redevelop our existing communities. And something I kind of reflect on and think on frequently is the Babcock Ranch project just east of Fort Myers, um, which I'm not sure how familiar you are or if that development actually falls into new urbanism. I know they have some tremendous sustainability um, components, but they were able to protect 74,000 acres of that property through a private public partnership with the state of Florida back in 2006 that Governor Bush led. Um, and just a few years ago, we saw the first female panther cross the Caloosahatchee River, enter northern habitat for the first time through the 1970s. And she was on a portion of that protected land on Babcock Ranch that would have been a subdivision if it weren't for that um, a partnership. And so really thinking about opportunities like that and being conscious in our decision making, I think is so important.
Definitely. And kind of just to wrap everything up, I just really want to say that I commend your efforts once again, and storytelling is so huge, and it's such a huge part of increasing awareness and to leading to actual actions. So for our listeners that want to get more involved with conserving these lands, or like the Everglades, or learning more about the Florida Wildlife Corridor, along with following you on the Path of the Panther on Instagram, or just looking up online, what other actions can they take to kind of align their lives and to make an impact with this sustainable movement?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I will reiterate, definitely follow us on Instagram at Path of the Panther and visit us online at pathofthepanther.com. Sign up for our newsletter where we'll be having calls to action in the coming months around this next legislative session, as well as sharing um, new films and other communications that we have coming out. We have both a 30-minute film on the Florida Wildlife Corridor coming out this fall or early winter, and then we have a feature documentary on the Florida Panther coming out sometime in 2022. But I think really the most important, essential piece to remember in all environmental issues is that each of us has an active role to play in ensuring a better and more sustainable future. The Florida Wildlife Corridor Act was a tremendous success, and I feel so grateful to have been part of um, this really visionary moment here in Florida, but it was the result of the actions of hundreds of people over the last decades, from map makers and researchers and scientists to landowners and concerned citizens. It all added up to this moment in time. And so write your policymakers, show up at your county commission meetings where so many of these decisions are actually being made. And the new urbanism community has such a role to really be a voice about, an sustainable alternative and what's possible, and make conscious decisions as a consumer. I think supporting Florida agriculture and buying local as much as possible ensures that there's a sustained economy for our farmers, which is also tremendously important.
100%. Thanks again for being on and connecting with the state of Miami. And please continue your amazing work with everything that you're doing. So we just want to say thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. This was such a pleasure. I'll talk to you soon.